Hello and welcome to Chapter 3. This is the first video of 3 and it is on the chapter for job costing. Let's go ahead and get into the material. We're going to cover 3 learning objectives today, and on the left side of the screen you can see which questions these learning objectives, which questions in the homework these learning objectives cover. So we're going to go through essentially the first 5 questions, and if I remember correctly on this homework there are 12 questions. So the first 2 learning objectives are more definitional, knowledge-based, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So job costing, well, it is different from another type of costing, and that's process costing. Job costing is based upon unique items. You can track the materials. You can track the materials and the labor to each individual product or job or service. And process costing, you can't. Either it's hard to track, impossible to track, or maybe not worth it. For example, if you were, words are going away. If you were making paper clips, you might not want to actually track each individual material and labor by paperclip. You might just say by box of paper clips or by batch of paper clips. So even though we are not actually going to be doing process costing in this course, accounting students need to at least know, and everyone needs to know, that there are 2 different types and we need to figure out when to use which one. So let's take a look here at a question that would be based upon that. So questions very similar to question 1. A legal firm, well, those take individual cases. You can track the amount of lawyers' hours and resources used upon each case, and so that would be a job. An oil refinery, well, you have crude oil come in. You're not sure. You know how much material, but per gallon of gasoline, you don't know what part of the crude material is used, and you don't know exactly the machinery time and the labors. So you would say that's a process costing. You know, a lot of times liquids like wine or shampoo or things like that are process costing because you might have an idea of the overall materials, but you're not exactly sure how the labor gets divided up per individual bottle of shampoo. A plumbing contractor, well, that's pretty obviously a job. You've got pipes and materials. You're working on a particular job. It starts and ends. I installed this sink, etc. A cereal manufacturer, well, this is sort of like the paperclip example. Sure, there are individual Fruit Loops or there are individual flakes of cereal, but either too small, too hard, or not really worth tracking by individual unit. So you may say, oh, this batch of cereal or this box of cereal. Custom home builder, sure. You have a house, you know who works on it, how long they work on it, you know how much material, how much lumber you brought there. So that would be a job costing prospect. Our second learning objective, question number 2, is production flow. And while they discuss in the book a couple of different things about production flow and being able to understand how things move from one to the next, our main focus is going to be that there's 3 types of inventory: raw materials, and things flow from raw materials to work in process, and then things flow from work in process to finished goods. And so we need to know when things leave raw materials and enter work in process, and when things leave work in process and enter finished goods. That's the most common thing. But there are times when things may happen to something in work in process, but it stays in work in process. And that might be because of, for example, maybe you added labor. Maybe you added labor and changed something. In other words, you had some value add. So this is taken from the question, but I'm not going to do all of it. Let's just kind of look at some examples. So lumber is requisitioned from the storeroom, okay? Well, it's moving out of raw materials, so the value of raw materials would decrease, and the work in process value would increase. It just shifted from one inventory to the next. Had nothing to do with finished goods. Nothing was finished, so that didn't change. Factory workers cut the lumber for the tables. Well, here, nothing changed inventory, but the value of work in process went up. We added labor to the lumber and therefore changed what the value of the inventory was. So we didn't switch inventories. All we did was increase the value. So keep that in mind. The production flow includes things moving between inventories and for things getting value add within an inventory. Okay, here is our primary learning objective, and the one we'll spend some more time on. Now, the whole purpose, remember, is we're trying to figure out cost of goods sold. And in financial statement, we looked at merchandising. People, Walmart or something like that buys finished goods and sells finished goods. They don't really do anything to it. For our manufacturing environment, we say, well, cost of goods sold actually is made up of a couple of things. We look at direct materials, we look at direct labor, and we look at manufacturing overhead. The truth is, job costing and process costing, and this kind of first a third of the course, is really focused on, okay, I can track these. I can track how much material and how much labor, but it's very hard for me to track all the indirect stuff. So we need to figure out a way to estimate this. So all this costing business is ways to estimate it. So we're going to estimate the manufacturing overhead. So there are two steps here. The first one is to take some sort of our best guess, our best estimate of what we think the total MOH is going to be. And this will be an estimate. And then we're going to say, okay, well, what's the best way to split up that manufacturing overhead? So a simple example might be, okay, buckets of nails for building houses. I'm not going to track each individual nail. That's going to be some sort of general indirect manufacturing overhead. Still involved in the production, but not something I'm going to track individually. So I may say something as simple as, all the houses I build are the same size. So I might just say, okay, each house uses about 1 bucket of nail. Well, so we're going to say, well, what is my total cost driver? And this idea of, okay, I use up nails about 1 bucket per house. So the cost driver in this case would be per house. Well, let's say you make different types of houses, different sizes. Well, you may have to have a little bit better refinement of your cost driver. You might say, okay, maybe it's every 1,000 square feet. Actually, I've done the math, and history shows that every 1,000 square feet I use about a bucket of nails. Well, in this course and in a lot of the problems, the cost driver is going to probably be direct labor hours or machine hours. So the point is, don't get too caught up on whatever this is. This is basically our best way of slicing up our estimate of manufacturing overhead. And remind yourselves here that this is also an estimate. We're taking two estimates and coming up with, this leads to this, the predetermined manufacturing overhead rate. And don't get, it's a long phrase, but a rate just means 1 bucket of nails per house. That's a rate. 1 bucket of nails per 1,000 square feet. That's the rate. It's just 1 per or something per another thing. Well, what we're trying to figure out is, well, we already determined that we were going to figure out that manufacturing overhead is what we're looking at. So that's already kind of baked into the title. And predetermined, well, that just means, oh yeah, we're going to figure it out beforehand based upon estimates. So this is our estimated MOH rate, and they use this crazy term. The second thing is, well, once we have this rate, we're going to take this rate and multiply it by, and this is super important, the actual cost driver. And that is going to give us our allocation of MOH. So after we use these estimates, we come up with a rate. And then at the end of the month, I'm going to actually know, for example, if I said how many houses, well, I may have said, I think I'm going to use 5 buckets of nails, and I think I'm going to make 5 houses. Therefore, it's 1 bucket of nail per house. But at the end of the month, what I'm going to say is, oh, I actually only made 3 houses. So in other words, I don't want allocate too much when I haven't really made that as many houses as I made my estimate based on. Okay, well, this will become clear as we kind of do the problem. So let's look at the first of these two steps. It's a little bit of, let's get rid of this little bit of stuff. Okay, so you notice that there's a bunch of words here, but we want to just realize that, okay, we're looking at estimates here, right? And this thing, remember, this is our rate. So we're just trying to use a couple of different estimates. And just like I used in the previous example, I said you could do it by house, or you could do it by 1,000 square feet, or you could do it by machine hours or whatever. Well, all that's showing here is we're going to figure out our predetermined overhead rate 3 different ways. We may end up using only one of these ways, but as an example in this problem, we're going to figure it out 3 different ways. Just to show you, it doesn't really matter how we split up the manufacturing overhead, as long as we do it consistently and we figure out what cost driver is the one that actually gives us the best results. So we may be doing this early on when we're just starting the business to figure out which actual thing works the best for us. So here we're going to start off with, well, this is our estimate of overhead cost. And if I'm saying, well, I actually think my best way to split up this overhead cost is by labor hours. Well, here I'm going to say, okay, well, I'm also estimating 50,000 labor hours. Well, this gives us $30. So we have our cost for direct labor hours, plus we're saying on top of every labor hour, we're going to add an extra $30 to kind of cover our estimate of manufacturing overhead costs. Well, the same thing happens down here. If we're going to say, okay, well, this is one way we could figure it out. What if we figure it out by direct labor cost? Well, our direct labor cost was 1 million. And this gives us a percentage. You can figure it out as percentage or as a dollar per amount. But if you can look at it, for every labor cost, we're adding on another $1.50. Okay, so labor hours, labor costs, and we would figure it out one more way. And we don't have to always do this. This is just an example of, hey, I don't know exactly which way I want to do it. Let's kind of look at 3 different ways. So if I looked at it instead of by machine hours, this would give me an overhead rate of $50 per machine hour. So the important thing to remember is you're dealing with the estimates, right? Estimated. No matter which way the problem says the company figures out their rate, you're going to use the estimates. So this would be what we'd call step 1. This was step 1. This is the rate, figuring out the rate. So step 2. Now we're going to apply that rate. We're going to take that rate, and you can see here we've been given some rates. And we're going to say, remember, the important thing is to take the rate. Boy, it's trying to level it out, times the actual. And this is the very important thing. Remember, when we're trying to do step number 2, when we're trying to figure out the allocation, we're going to take the rate times the actual. So here, actual direct labor hours. You may go up here and say, oh, look, I see a number here of direct labor hours. But remember, these numbers, we don't care about these numbers, because these numbers were created. This is like step 1. They're just showing you step 1. These numbers were used to figure out the 64. We're going to take the 64, that's our rate, and we're going to multiply it by, well, that's why I've highlighted it. The actually used 18,950. So I did the calculation separately. So that came out, I'm not going to do it in my head. So we'll just do the same thing here. What is the predetermined overhead rate for labor costs? Well, it's 120%. And don't get suckered in by this number up here. This was all step 1. This was step 1 right here. It's already been, if you've already been given the rate, then use the rate and multiply it by the actual labor cost. So here it's 0.024. And so our allocation will come out to and same down here. Our predetermined overhead rate here was $80. And our actual machine hours, don't go up there. This was our guess. Remember, this was our guess. This is what actually happened. And that comes out to. So step 2, use the rate times the actual. Important. Step 1, use the two estimates to get the rate. Step 2, use the rate times the actual to get the allocation. And so the question in the homework actually has a little bit of extra things. So I've kind of highlighted here. The total amount of manufacturing overhead is dependent upon two factors. The allocation base used, well, yes, whether you used machine hours, labor cost, or labor hours, and the actual quantity. This is super important. It's what you chose as the cost driver and how much it actually was. The company, and this is a little bit of foreshadowing of the next learning objective, or one of the next objectives, over allocation or under allocation. Well, as you can see, I guessed that this was my best guess for labor hours, $1.2 million. But my allocation was 1.212, right? Well, the third step would be, at some point down the road, I'm going to find out what my manufacturing overhead really is. If my manufacturing overhead really is only $1 million, well, then I put too much. I put too much down. I guessed too high. But if it was 1.5 million, I guessed too low. And so that is the idea of over allocation and under allocation. Remember, this is just my best guess at this point in time. So the company could over allocate or under allocate depending upon the base used and the actual manufacturing. So depending upon what we used, if we didn't select the best one, we're always going to, very rarely will we guess exactly right. There's always going to be a little over allocation or a little under allocation. We just want that number to be as small as possible. Okay, the last piece of this. Here we have a question similar to question number 5. This particular company makes furniture, and they're introducing two types of direct materials here. So don't get too wrapped up into all the information. In fact, I've kind of bulleted out the information. It comes in a big text block, but you kind of read it out. Just remember here that they're giving you the rate, aren't they? They use a predetermined manufacturing overhead rate of $16. So they're giving you some of the information up front. In other words, they're doing step 1. Then they give you, this is a type of direct material, and this is a type of direct material. And so remember, when we're trying to figure out the cost of the job, we're going to be adding direct materials, direct labor, and our best guess at manufacturing overhead. So here we have two direct materials. We have number 1, 50 times 3.8. That's going to come out to $190 for this one. Or here, maybe I'll put it on this side. The recycled content comes out at 310 times 50, and I think I kind of did this beforehand, 155. So these two together add up to 345. So you have two different materials. You figure them out. They each have their rate. And that's the materials. Direct labor, well, that's simple. That's just a direct, you just have one direct labor calculation. 12 times 20, that's 240. Now, how do you figure out manufacturing overhead? Well, you use the rate. And what is it based upon? It's based upon labor hours. So here, we would say, we'd use the rate. Remember, it's the rate times the actual, right? And what is our actual? It says $16 per labor hour. And we had 12 hours. So that's going to give us 192. So the total job cost comes out at, well, that's kind of lucky, 777. And this particular question has an additional little part. Since we divided up into two different types of material, they're trying to get you in the habit of looking at multiple inputs, whether they're materials, labor, or overhead. And this is sort of practice for the next chapter. So how many pounds of recycled content did we use? Well, the recycled content, we used 50 pounds. How many pounds total? Well, it was 50 and 50, so we used 100 pounds. What's that percentage? Well, I chose numbers that were easy, so 50%. So the last part of the question is, if items purchased by this county are required to contain at least 60% recycled content, does this job meet the requirement? Well, in this case, we only have 50% recycled requirement, so we would say no. Okay, well, that should allow you to get through questions 1 through 5. We'll pick up with the next couple of questions in video 2. Thank you. And any questions, make sure to email me or visit the office hours on Monday or Wednesday.